Games are good, and while I'm working on finding more ways to show the benefits of gaming and the power the medium can have, I also just want to celebrate the games that I love. And so, inspired by a recent comment asking if I will ever talk about the LittleBigPlanet franchise, I decided to talk about the LittleBigPlanet franchise. Obviously, the history of the franchise, my memories of playing it, why I love it, and where it's currently at, it's all here. Let's celebrate LittleBigPlanet. It all starts in Guildford in the county of Surrey in southeast England. Mark Healy and Dave Smith, two developers for Fable Studio Lionhead, had a chat after a trip to the cinema and came up with the concept of a physics-based platformer designed specifically for consoles. The concept was Craftworld, and the protagonist was Mr. Yellowhead, and he flopped his way along using some unique twin-stick controls. They left Lionhead and formed a team called Medium Molecule with Alex Evans and Kareem Etouni. They presented their early prototype to Phil Harrison, then president of Sony Worldwide Studios, who seemed only mildly impressed until the duo casually mentioned the possibility of user-created content. The excitement over a platformer built around creativity led a 45-minute presentation to turn into 3 hours, as Harrison explored the concept with the team, and it all ended with Sony providing funding for a more fleshed out prototype for 6 months, with a decision to be made about further funding based on the quality of that prototype. As you'd expect, the team succeeded and the game became LittleBigPlanet, with Mr. Yellowhead now replaced by Sackboy, the burlap cloth chap that we all know and love. After a hugely successful public reveal at GDC 2007, the team eagerly completed the base game, and it eventually launched in October 2008. And then, due to some potential controversy over an in-game song, the game was then pulled from sale and re-released with an instrumental version in its place in early November. And then, finally, the world was introduced to LittleBigPlanet. I didn't know much about the game prior to its release. I stumbled on it in a game shop a few months after I got my PS3 and wondered what this cute looking game with a smiling cloth lad on the cover was all about. I bought it on sale, took it home and immediately heard Stephen Fry?
On the LittleBigPlanet, you're a little sack person. This one is you? Oh, bless. You're quite a cute one.
Already a national treasure here in the UK, hearing Fry's voice made me realise just how quintessentially British this game was going to be. This feeling was strengthened by the immediate presence of Left Bank 2, a piece of library music famously used in the UK as the soundtrack to an art gallery segment of a children's TV show in the 60s and 70s. As someone born in the 80s, I did not see the show in question, but its influence on pop culture here in the UK is so vast that even I was aware of its origins. And then the first proper level featured the track Get It Together by the Go Team, a band that I'd gotten into while at university, and suddenly I started to become aware of just how much this game felt designed for me. I was in love. The aesthetic, the cheerful and welcoming tone, the music, even the floaty platforming style that some players at the time seemed to hate. It was all perfect to me. The world tour concept of the game was excellent too, starting in a garden in the UK where Sackboy's small size turned a lawn into a vast space to navigate. The journey would take our cuddly friend to Mexico, New York, Japan and finally Russia through a series of increasingly tricky challenges, right up until the bunker arrived and it decided to stop being so nice. Sure, the story was flimsy and the additional characters were loosely constructed objects with moving parts, but this added to the charm, like an amateur puppet show that someone's desperate to show me because they made it all themselves. And that's just sweet. And what's more, it encouraged you to do the same. I attempted to delve into create mode and was pleased to see how easy it was to put something together. I managed to make a couple of levels, or at least the beginnings of some levels. All I'm able to show you now are levels from the second game due to a crashed PS3 and ongoing server issues with the series itself. Here's an ambitious level about a heist in a massive skyscraper which is drastically unfinished, and here's a level I'm particularly proud of set in a spooky crypt full of elemental themed puzzles. It definitely needs some tweaking as it's a little too frustrating in places, but hey, I did hide some Easter eggs in there. Literally. LittleBigPlanet was a warm hug of a game, and it quickly became a favourite. The success of LittleBigPlanet was inevitably going to lead to Sony wanting more out of Medium Molecule. They bought the studio, and LittleBigPlanet 2 was soon greenlit. The sequel released in 2011 and was pretty much more of the same, but better. The story mode featured additional characters who weren't just set dressing and instead were their own specially reskinned sack people in their own right. And the new villain of the story felt like a more present threat than the weird egg creature who showed up and promptly got trounced suddenly at the end of the first game. The theme of Sackboy's journey changed too, with Sackboy travelling through time and experiencing improving technology in each region he visits. You start with the Renaissance, move through a steampunk Victorian area built out of cakes, then there's the Atomic Age filled with tiny assistant robots, and then you finally head up into space for an epic battle for the ages. But it wasn't just the story mode. Create mode gained some extra logic tools to make more complex creations and encouraging people to make things that weren't platformers. The more inventive tools also rolled back into the story mode itself, with levels like a bee-based space shooter, a caterpillar race, and a bouncing bunny mech training course that added variety to the levels and showed just how limitless creativity can truly be. This was the height of the franchise, a vibrant community, a whole bunch of interesting creations online, and a fun platformer to boot. The music was also a step up, with even more catchy original tracks, and licensed tracks really stretching the possibilities of what they could add, with Norwegian electro weirdos Royksop, trance DJ Ferry Corsten, and operatic metal band Nightwish all showing up. But the increased presence of additional developers made it clear that Media Molecule were possibly not willing to maintain this forever, and that their own boundless creativity was taking them somewhere else. Much of this game's DLC would be shipped out to Fireproof Studios, Supermassive Games, and the developers of the Vita spin-off Tarsier Studios, and from then on, Media Molecule would only work on LittleBigPlanet in a consulting role. So what happened next for the franchise now that its primary developer had left? The shift began even before LittleBigPlanet 2 released. Sony wanted to take the franchise's ethos of play, create and share and apply it to other games. Cue Mod Nation Racers, a kart racer from developer United Front Games. Just like LittleBigPlanet, it featured a customizable lead character and a full level editor that allowed creations to be shared with other players with ease. It didn't quite have the same charm as LittleBigPlanet though. Unlike Media Molecule's wholesome British escapade through craft materials, Mod Nation Racers was a bit edgier, a lot brasher, and seemed skewed to an older audience. It was decent enough though, but didn't seem to capture attention in the same way. But it wouldn't be long until the two worlds merged, and United Front would be brought in to take their kart racing formula and apply it directly to LittleBigPlanet. The result was LittleBigPlanet Karting, which functionally wasn't all that different to Mod Nation. It handled similarly, and the track editor was superficially the exact same editor, but now it had the tone and setting of Sackboy's crafty home instead. And it was decent. It may be not what the series needed, and launching so close to the second title might have been a misstep, but it was fun. It had the right vibe, it continued to have excellent music, and had a lot of good stuff going for it. But it didn't quite feel the same as the main series, and it largely faded into obscurity. A proper sequel wouldn't be seen until 2 years later, when LittleBigPlanet 3 launched after a sudden announcement on stage at E3 2014. Media Molecule were no longer the lead developer, and Sheffield-based Sumo Digital took the reins instead, fresh off their work on Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed. And they made some changes. The number of planes the game took place on dramatically increased, and the story was driven much more by fully voiced characters instead of the text bubbles and gibberish that accompanied the cast in previous titles. The voice cast was also a star-studded one, with Stephen Fry's narrator joined by a villain voiced by his old colleague Hugh Laurie, as well as characters voiced by Nolan North, Tara Strong, and Peter Serafinowicz. But it still wasn't perfect. The story mode felt significantly shorter, and the shift in developer was fairly noticeable, as it felt like it was just missing something. It felt like a developer emulating what Media Molecule did, rather than feeling like them putting their own spin on it specifically. However, the new character additions were nice, adding some neat gameplay additions, although they could sometimes feel underutilized. There's a feeling of it rushing to market with a developer who'd not had enough time to figure out their spin on the formula quite yet. It was also notoriously buggy, with multiple issues at launch. And it was here that the series seemed to falter a bit, as things would quieten down from here on out. But Little Big Planet's presence was still felt in the industry, and plenty of related experiences could be found. Media Molecule themselves released Tearaway for the Vita in 2013, which brought the crafted world aesthetics of Little Big Planet into a pure 3D platformer. It was an inventive little game making expert use of the system's many unique features. For instance, you would exist in the world's sun, and you could poke your fingers into the world using the back touchpad, and could use the touchscreen and gyroscope for all manner of things as you guided your little papercraft person around the world. This was an adorable little game, hindered by its reliance on a system that Sony neglected to give a proper chance. It would get a pseudo remake / port on the PS4 however, but numerous features had to change. But either way, it was an excellent game that you should check out if you never got a chance to. The director, Rex Crowley, would leave Media Molecule amicably shortly afterwards, where he would launch a Kickstarter for a game inspired by Earthbound that very much shared an art style with Tearaway. The game finally released in 2019 as Knights and Bikes, a small-scale adventure game starring two girls on a Cornish island going on an adventure to find an old knight's treasure. The game was largely co-op, but could be played just as effectively solo, and it was an excellent little experience. It had an infectious sense of humour and conveyed the joy of being a child and going off exploring extremely well. And it was easily one of my favourite games of 2019. Other Little Big Planet developers were releasing games with the same vibe too, such as Sumo Digital. Little Big Planet 3 developer Seb Lease produced Snake Pass as part of an internal game jam, when a mistake involving a rope led to him creating a snake. This became a full release, a simplistic yet hugely creative platformer with no jumping. Instead, you play as a snake called Noodle who navigates by coiling around objects. It was intensely likeable and innovative, although I will admit I found the full game a little too frustrating to truly love it. But the spirit of the game was very much in the feel of Little Big Planet, and it was a logical step for the team after the third game. Of course, not every Little Big Planet adjacent game was bright and colourful. Tarsier Studios, the developers of various DLC packs and the Vita edition of Little Big Planet, would move away from the franchise too. Working with Bandai Namco, they would go and create Little Nightmares, a game that looked a lot like Little Big Planet's evil twin. It's a game with a cartoony aesthetic, but much more Tim Burton than Little Big Planet's Aardman. Little Nightmares followed a girl in a raincoat named Six as she tried to evade threats on a ship. Its visuals and its pseudo 2D perspective were very Little Big Planet in their execution, like someone had used the cutesy tools and used them to make horror. And it was amazing, spawning a sequel earlier this year, and well, I'm gonna leave it there because I may be doing more on this in a future video. But if you wanted an authentic Little Big Planet experience in this time, you were struggling. Not least because in recent years, the online servers have been encountering a lot of issues, to the point where the servers are still unusable due to hacks and DDoS attacks from disgruntled fans. It's messy and not clear if or when it'll ever get back to normal. But for fans of the series in 2020, there was kind of a way to experience Little Big Planet in two separate games. For those who adored Create Mode and wanted more tools to create more bizarre things, Media Molecule finally released Dreams, a creation suite that was much more advanced than anything Little Big Planet offered, while retaining its sense of joy and wonder. I've attempted to make stuff in Dreams and it's messy. I have no idea what I'm doing, and every character model I start building looks a little like it wants to be put out of its misery. But I respect the tool set. Media Molecule have put together a development suite accessible to anyone with a PS4, which offers enough freedom to create almost anything. And it's genuinely something special. Now, if someone could help me not be terrible with it, that'd be great. But if you prefer the world and the platforming of Little Big Planet, Sumo Digital returned for another game, Sackboy: A Big Adventure. Very explicitly a spin-off of the franchise, this is purely a platformer, lacking the creative tools but still maintaining its values and world. And it's brilliant. I've been playing through it recently and it's endlessly charming. The levels continually introduce inventive new mechanics and the various settings are used to their full potential. And the music aspect of Little Big Planet is ramped up in a massive way here too. As well as the excellent licensed selection of music that allows you to build a playlist of new and interesting artists, they also built a set of levels around popular songs allowing you to platform to the tune of Uptown Funk or Jungle Boogie, and even then more songs were licensed and rearranged into a Little Big Planet style, so if you ever wanted a haunted carnival version of Madness's House of Fun, Sackboy will provide. We may not have a new Little Big Planet, but instead we have two amazing games that each offer a hugely expanded version of one of the two pillars that made up the franchise over the years. I wouldn't complain if this was the future of the series, honestly. Both Dreams and Sackboy: A Big Adventure carry the torch for the franchise in new and exciting ways, and both are lovely titles that I would recommend to anyone. So in all of this, there's a point that I've not brought up yet. My love of Little Big Planet goes much further than simply thinking it's a fun platformer with a nice little creation suite attached. No, Little Big Planet often feels like how I imagine it being to navigate the inside of my brain. This might be an odd claim, but it basically looks and feels like my childhood, where I adored shows like Art Attack, where host Neil Buchanan would make gigantic pictures out of household objects, and then return to a slightly low-budget studio to tell you how to make photo frames out of sponges or something. I used to try and follow all of this and make the stuff myself, and a lot of it was unsuccessful, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I also used to spend a lot of time drawing cartoons, and as someone who read a lot of magazines which featured puzzles and comics, I used to try and replicate that, with an art style that wasn't great, but once again I had a lot of fun doing it. I even tried my hand at music, which is mostly me trying to figure out how instruments work and failing. I tried my hand at writing very bad songs during my teens, most of which only ever existed in my head and can't be replicated because of the aforementioned inability to play instruments well. One of those songs was a goofy little song called Pet Ferret, where the lyrics described me buying and then dealing with the shenanigans of a ferret that I named Bob. And if you're wondering, is that the origin of the channel name? You would be absolutely correct, and now you know. You're welcome. And then there are the attempts at short stories and novels that have never been finished, but I do intend to one day. It's a big part of why I'm interested in storytelling that led to the creation of the Chapter Select series on here. And yes, this channel is yet another creative outlet for me, one that I'm constantly trying to improve and build on as much as possible. The point here is, I've always been creative, and I can't stop being creative. I need to play around with ideas in whatever format works for me at the time. To not be creative is the greatest sin possible in my mind. And even if I may not always have a lot to show for it, and it's always a bit rough around the edges, the satisfaction of making something and saying, that's mine, I made that, is a lovely feeling. It is ultimately better to make something that's a bit rubbish but is wholly yours, than it is to not make anything at all. Little Big Planet is that mentality in video game form. This is a game series built around a deliberately unrefined craft aesthetic, like it's been put together by someone just messing around with milk cartons and sticky back plastic. Create mode encourages you to develop levels however you see fit, and Dreams takes this to an even more extreme level. And of course I've tested my creativity here too with my basic levels that I'm quite proud of even if they're not amazing. And the fact that the game encourages this attitude of just make something, it doesn't have to be good, is special to me. It's an attitude that we all need to have. This gentle craft aesthetic is met with gentle British voiceovers like Stephen Fry, and I often feel that my life would be much better if it was narrated by Stephen Fry. And the soundtrack? A quick glance at my Spotify playlist will indicate that the Venn diagram between them is basically a circle. The fact that I recognised the Go Team in the opening levels of the first game, then Roixop's Vision 1 in the second game, and then cheered when Pop It by Anna Managuchi showed up in Sackboy: A Big Adventure, should tell you just how much my tastes align with the games. And it has absolutely given me new artists to listen to in the tracks that I didn't recognise immediately, and I have been listening to a lot of After Gold by Big Wild, just because of Sackboy. Dear God. But ultimately, the game's vibe is one that exudes positivity, joy, and optimism, and it's why I adore it so much. We live in an increasingly angry world, one where we have to have hot takes on everything and pick a side in whatever invented culture war is popping up now. And in this environment, it's rare to find a refuge where you can be joyful and creative. In a world of cruelty, being positive, creative, and friendly is a defiant act, which kind of makes Little Big Planet one of the most punk games around. I adore this series. and we need more like it in the world. So I encourage you all to take its ethos to heart and to head out into the world with a mentality of positivity and creativity in everything you do, regardless of what anybody says. And if you agree with this message, why not give the video a like? And if you're not already subscribed, why not sort that out right now? If you've enjoyed this, you may also enjoy some of these other videos I have to offer too. And if you can, I'd really appreciate some of your support over on Patreon, where you can join all these lovely people, who I'd like to say a big thank you to them, especially. And thank you for watching, all of you lovely people. And I will see you again very soon.